Welcome, everybody. My name is Tommy Soares. I'm Assistant Director of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. And today on Pathfinder, I have the honor of welcoming Susan Bogdanowich-Knipp, President and Consultant at Ravine Pharmaceuticals, LLC. Welcome to the program, Susan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us and taking time to talk to us today. I'm so excited to get to know a little bit more about your journey. I think you have such a unique career and role that I think a lot of the people that tune into this program today are really going to want to know, well, what is she doing and how did she get there? So perhaps you can give us a little bit of a background on you and your education and how you got to be to where you are right now as president and consultant at Ravine Pharmaceuticals.
Sure. So let me start at the beginning. So got my undergrad degree in chemistry at Rutgers University. And then immediately after that, I decided, hey, I wanted to cure the world. I want to find a cure for cancer, seriously. So I decided the only way I'd be able to do that is to go get a job at a large pharma company. So I joined E.R. Squibb & Sons. At the time, it was E.R. Squibb & Sons. And then a few years later, Bristol-Myers bought it out. But I learned so much about solid-state chemistry. I had wonderful mentors, things I had never learned as an undergrad. And I thought, this is amazing. And I decided if I wanted to further my career, I really need to go back to grad school. So I came to Purdue for a year and then transferred to University of Kansas in their pharmaceutical chemistry program. Again, best experience of my life, wonderful mentors, colleagues. It literally was the best time of my life. And I enjoyed it so much. And then afterwards, I decided, well, yeah, I probably want to go back into big pharma again. So I got a job at Plough Research Institute. And since then, Merck has purchased them. And I did a lot of pre-formulation studies. And I worked with medicinal chemists, everything from, drug discovery folks all the way through formulators and development, help develop compounds into stage 2, really having an impact. And then about 17 years ago, moved to West Lafayette and started a career at the time SSCI, doing solid-state chemistry again. This time it was a little different. We're more of a CRO, a service organization. So totally different perspective about helping develop molecules into life-saving drugs. And then I had the opportunity to basically start again on my own and started consulting about 2.5 years ago. Love every minute of it. Doing the same thing, helping develop drugs and bringing life-saving products to the market. So it's just been a wonderful experience.
That's awesome. And it sounds like your journey was a bit of a hop, skip, and a jump through academia, but also with industry experience early on.
Right.
What do you think did that for you at the time? And reflecting back on that experience, what do you think it did that for you as you are in your career now?
Yeah, I think it actually was a great opportunity. So I worked for 4 years and then went back to grad school, and I learned an awful lot of things. It helped me guide my career. So I think maybe 2 years might have been too few years, but more than 4, more than 5, then I think folks have an issue with, leaving all that money that they're making and going back to school. But it really helped me guide my career. It really, really did. And I'm so glad things worked out that way.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that piece about money, because it is such a lure for everybody. But it sounds to me like you had the foresight, the maturity to say, I'm gonna just get myself a little bit more prepared by going back to grad school. I'm sure having made a little bit of money helped you to not live like a poor student in grad school, also. But would you recommend that to somebody finishing their undergrad? Let's say, like many of us, I'm in that boat too, where I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. And I thought, okay, well, everybody else is going to grad school. I might as well go to grad school as well. But this deviation to have an opportunity to work in industry and see what it's all about, it sounds almost like a good idea as well, just to broaden your perspective, right?
Right. No, absolutely. And I know folks that, right after undergrad, you're working really hard for 4 years, sometimes 4+ years, and you don't want to burn out. And I know some people that did. They burned out. They went to graduate school. They totally burned out. And instead of completing their PhD, they basically left with a master's, and that was it. So when I saw that as well with some of my friends, I realized that I had made the right choice. And I didn't want to burn out. And you mentioned the thing about money. I had been saving all along because I knew eventually I wanted to go back to grad school. So that was in my mind the whole time.
Again, so smart, Susan. This is great. I love that. I think, again, and if you have a better defined path going into grad school, again, it seems like you could probably accomplish the work faster, maybe even more efficiently. Tell us about this time in Kansas. You said Kansas, right? To do your grad school?
Yeah, and pharmaceutical chemistry program. So both my husband and I were at the same program. I just joined a year after he did. So that made things a little bit easier. But we met our friends for life there. So I think having a really good experience in grad school, not just the studies, not just the learning, but getting to be able to learn how to communicate better and meeting your colleagues. Like I said, these are going to be your friends for life. It's such a small world out there, no matter what your field. And you're always going to run into people that either you went to school with or went to your same program, and maybe you just missed each other by a few years. And I think that's going to have a big impact on your career going forward.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit, because there is this element of us always comparing ourselves to others, and that might lead people down a burnout path rather than making yourself better. But there's also this piece that networking that you're bringing about. Networking seems to be a key component to help us in our career and further down in our career.
Absolutely. And the folks you meet, there's never a second chance to make a first impression. So always keep that in mind, and just make sure that you can communicate well. And you don't want to burn bridges, because like I said, it's such a small world. It's amazing how many people I run into 20 years ago that I had met or I had worked with. And so, yes, networking is key. It's really critical to your career, advancing your career, or potentially hindering your career.
Yeah, absolutely. How do we prevent ourselves from committing the mistakes of burning bridges? How do we prevent that from happening, knowing that sometimes we do, get into our own little worlds and we start to dislike others that make us do things? How do we, it's so important, that piece of advice, that we have to maintain good relationships, and you don't want to burn bridges that you might need later on. How did you go about that? What kind of thought process, or what were you thinking as you were moving around, understanding the challenges of working with people? What do you think helped you not to burn those bridges?
Honestly, I think the key is being respectful of others. Everyone has a different style of working, of learning. And I think just being open-minded and respectful of that really helped. And then again, you know, coming from industry, it's a different perspective than being in a CRO. And in being a CRO, you really have to be respectful of your clients, or else you're going to lose them. So that really helped the past 15, 17 years. Just being on that service side really helped.
Tell us a little bit about that service orientation, because it's very different than, you know, I'm just doing my own research for my own question. It seems like you're really doing it for another company that has entrusted you with the responsibility of giving them some good answers, right? Impactful answers.
Yeah. So being on the service side, completely different, totally different mindset. But it's so much fun because there are so many clients out there that have issues that they can't potentially solve. And so they come to you for your expertise. And so you're not only getting to interact with folks that perhaps you haven't met before, or perhaps you have in a previous, you know, experience, you get to solve their problems. And it's a lot of fun. It's very enjoyable. There's and you realize, like I said, how small world it is, even though there's so many diverse companies out there. It's really a small world.
I think you're making a very important point too, that I think the audience watching this interview today is important for them to realize is this small. Does that mean, Susan, you keep bumping into the same people all the time? We're a small group, us scientists in this world. And I heard a statistic that 90% of all the scientists that have ever lived in humanity, in the history of humanity, 90% are alive today. So that tells you how small it is and how few of us. But does that mean you keep bumping into the same people? Is this the point you're trying to make, that you know it's a small world because there's not many of us?
Yeah. So especially when you go to scientific meetings, you will run into the folks that you've met 20 years ago. But then you also have the opportunity to meet new and upcoming scientists, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the pressure in the CRO of service provision, service delivery. Is it, I mean, how, because I would think, you know, when we do projects, we try to go as deep as we can to answer questions, and sometimes you have to just stop. But this is like you're doing this work for somebody else that is going to define what pathway they go towards commercialization, right? In these drugs that need to be formulated, and the stability of them. I mean, a lot of us, without thinking, and this is why I respect so much the work that you do, is because, you know, without thinking, I go to my shelf and I get that bottle of headache medication, and it works year after year, and it doesn't, you leave it there for a decade, and then you take it again and it still works. And so stabilizing those molecules and making sure that they have the shelf life. I mean, that in a CRO mode, it must be a lot of responsibility and a lot of pressure.
It is, and I think the big thing is it's time, right? So your clients want that work, they want it done right away. And a lot of times they're coming to you because maybe they don't have capacity to do it themselves, or they don't know how to do it, right? So having that added burden of the timeline really, it puts a different pressure on things than I was used to in the past in industry. And then there's also, you mentioned being able to do your research, and then at some point you have to stop. Well, yes, you're getting paid for a certain scope of work, you know, during that timeline, and you're supposed to be able to figure that out. And, you know, as a scientist, you want to keep learning, you want to keep doing additional work. but sometimes you just have to say, okay, we've done our scope of work. And then potentially, your client will continue to do work with you if they find out that, hey, you've discovered something that they didn't know. So there's always that potential to add on.
Yeah. Yeah. So the added value that you can bring to the table, right?
Right. Exactly.
And Susan, you mentioned communication a couple of times and as being a key element. Does that change when you move from academia to industry? Does the level of communication change? Does your approach to communicating to people change? What kind of recommendations would you give to people in terms of like how to hone in on communication skills?
Well, I think like you said, the level changes slightly because you're going to be dealing with a lot of different types of people, a lot of different levels. You may be dealing with vice presidents, that you hadn't dealt with before. So I think just constantly improving your communication and perhaps listening to others, your boss or your mentors, just really listening to how they answer questions and observing how they communicate with others, that goes a long way.
I like that a lot. So you're essentially saying, sit there quietly and just observe people and observe what they're doing at that level and what they're saying.
Yeah, sometimes that's the key to learning yourself, and then something will click and you realize, oh, okay, that's how I should act.
Yes, totally. I like that too, because again, many times we need to follow the leader, right? And that means learning from the way we should say things, not only what we should say, but the way things are said or our behavior
Exactly.
in front of the meeting. We love to crack jokes, but sometimes it's not always appropriate, right? Or if
That's
we
right.
want to talk a lot about our stuff, sometimes it's not always the most appropriate. And you also talked a little bit about the mentors that you've had and that have impacted you. Tell us a little bit about some of these people and how have they inspired you or put you in the right direction?
So I guess, different folks that I've worked with weren't, I consider them my mentors just because I learned so much from them. Communication skills, and then, maybe learning organizational skills, and how to keep my mind active and keep learning. But they were folks that I worked with, and they probably wouldn't consider themselves mentors. But yeah, they had so much impact on me. Helping me when I didn't understand a question, encouraging me to go back to grad school because they knew I had that, I always wanted to learn. I always wanted to figure things out, in a different way. So yeah, I think that is the key.
Yeah. And can you think back at your time when you were transitioning either from industry back to, I think we lost her.
Yeah.
There you are. There you are.
Okay, yeah. My computer went back. I just had to reconnect, so sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So Susan, can you think back at the time when you were transitioning from either academia to industry or industry to academia, and those points of transition, are there any recommendations that you got from mentors at that time who said to you, hey, think about this or prepare for that as you're transitioning? It's in this transition moment that I'm curious about, because it's a lot of decisions, it's a lot of transformations, it's a lot of moving around mentally, but also sometimes physically, and so that throws people off. But are there any recommendations that you can make or that you got at that time?
So I think just making sure that you're prepared for that. So going from industry to academia, say, for example, you're just prepared for I guess, the loss of money, right? And how you're going to manage, mentally, you're used to going out or, having fun, going to concerts, whatever, going to the movies. And when you go to grad school, hey, you're going to really be immersed in your studies. You're not going to have the money to go out and do what you want on the weekends. Nor will you have the time because you'll be studying all the time. So I think that's something really important to consider. The other thing to consider is, where exactly you want to be. Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And that will dictate, what school you go to, potentially what program, and then also, what job that you get, which industry do you really want to go into?
Yeah. And that's hard to figure out because there's so many options, right? What drove you down this path? What made you say, oh, this is exactly what I think I'd like to do?
I think, so going back to when I was working at Squibb, I started learning all about solid state chemistry. And that was totally new to me. I'd never really even heard about that as an undergrad. And it piqued my attention. I love doing the work. I did that for 4 years, and I thought, well, I really want to stay, somewhat in this field. But then I also figured that I really needed to learn more. I wanted to learn more about large molecules, as opposed to small molecules. So I went to a program that basically gave me a really broad background, a really solid background in all those areas.
And Susan, if you were to provide some brief description of what solid state chemistry is and what a solid state chemist does on a day-to-day basis, what would that be?
Okay, so basically you're trying to understand, characterize materials, how they are in the solid state in their crystalline form, right? So sodium chloride, basically, it's a solid and it makes nice crystals. Well, compounds like drugs of interest would do the same thing potentially. And that can reflect how well they're absorbed in the body. And it can reflect their stability and how soluble they are. So it's really important to understand that aspect of a solid material.
And so what type of analysis do you do to understand those different aspects? Can you tell us a little bit about the equipment or analytical chemistry techniques?
Yeah, and they may be some that folks have not heard of before, because as an undergrad, I wasn't aware of these either. So one of the big ones is an X-ray pattern diffractometer. So you're basically trying to determine that crystal structure of your molecule. And another one is trying to measure thermal properties. So a DSC, or a differential scanning calorimeter. So it basically measures your heat flow as a function of the temperature. Heat your sample up. Where does it melt? Where does it evolve gas, if there's any, in that molecule? And another one is a TG, a thermogravimetric analyzer. So that measures weight loss as a function of temperature. So you heat up your sample. Is there any solvent coming off? And then there's also other techniques like, IR and Raman, and you could do solid state NMR as well.
So interesting. And I think that's a peek into a world that many people in academia, unless they're in a pharmacy program that is looking at industrial pharmacy processes and so on, it's not very common, right? And we're lucky to be able to have this program here at Purdue that specializes in some of that. I know you've worked with some of the people that have come out of Purdue, some of the alumni and so on, but it seems like you also moved around the country. And I asked this question many times of our Pathfinders is, did you find that there is a different culture in different parts of the country, or is it mainly a different culture depending on the company that you're working in?
Yeah, I think it's the company. And I think, over the past 25, 30 years, they have evolved so much. But yeah, there's companies that are very progressive. There's companies that are very conservative. So I don't necessarily think it's the geographic region. I personally, my experience has been with the individual companies.
Yeah. And I am also curious to ask you, you again had so many years of experience working within a company, and now you have the opportunity to be a consultant. Do you still work at a lab, or do you do only consultancy for people that are working in the lab and you're providing guidance for them?
Yeah, so right now I am working as a consultant. There's a group of about 8 or 9 of us that work together with Improved Pharma, and we actually have a laboratory in the Kurtz Technology Center. So I literally am working in the lab, doing experiments, things that I hadn't done probably in years. It is so much fun. I get to provide my expertise, and thoughts to our clients. And then also, within each other as consultants, since we've all worked together in the past, literally, everyone I work with, I have worked in the past with, we get along very, very well. And there's always an opportunity to learn something new or provide your area of expertise, because we complement each other very well.
Does that help you with the work? Do you think that that's an element for your success?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think being able to bounce some ideas, generically off of my colleagues, I think it really, really helps move projects forward.
What about the camaraderie and the trust? Is it like how it was when you were in grad school and you had other grad students and postdocs around and you would help each other out in the lab? Does that continue on, obviously at a higher level of professionalism, maybe, or maybe not? What's the culture inside the lab?
Yeah, so it's both. I think it depends. It depends on the project and the client. So some projects, there are several of us that can work together, and other projects, there's not, based on secrecy agreements. So yeah, I think it is somewhat similar, but there are slight differences. And like you said, it's a more professional level, I guess, than grad school.
And you mentioned these secrecy agreements too. Tell us a little bit about that. Does that mean that not everybody knows what you're doing? Other people that you don't know what they're doing necessarily, or what they're working on?
So potentially, yeah, it depends on the project, what I'm allowed to disclose, who's allowed to work with me, and vice versa for my other colleagues.
So that's interesting in itself, and it seems like there's great competition in this area to try to create the next molecules and the next solid state chemistry conditions that will stabilize them and keep them there. Did this consultancy piece just result out of necessity, or do you think I think now I'm ready and we're gonna venture in this direction?
I think the opportunity just arose, and things just fell into place. I think it was very serendipitous, and honestly, I just love what I'm doing right now. I really do.
That's awesome. But Susan, there are many students or recent doctorate degree students, PhDs, that want to go into consultancy. Is it a good idea for them to just jump into a consultancy job, or would you recommend having a little bit more experience in that realm before jumping in?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. I think as a young person, a young scientist, you really need to get that experience. And as a consultant, you're not going to be able to have most likely get that experience that you would if you were in a company. So I would highly recommend learning as much as you can in a company before you started consulting. So if you had asked me, if you'd interviewed me 10 years ago, I would have said I would have not been ready to be a consultant.
And why is that?
Because I think the learning process, I think there's, again, improving communication skills, learning from others, and just trying to learn as much scientifically to help you solve problems, and have an important, insightful impact, really, on products and helping clients. I just think you really need that laboratory experience in order to gain that knowledge.
Do you think it's also important to have the working relationship experience, working with different people, continue to, work at different levels with different people? Is that also part of the element, or is it mainly, you really need to know what works in the lab and what doesn't work? Otherwise, your consultation is not going to be as impactful.
I think it's probably both, but I think working in a lab it's a large majority of it, at least in my experience. That's what I have found.
And is it also meaning the way that you work with people in the lab, or is it just making mistakes in the lab, knowing what works, what doesn't work?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's both. It's everything. Being able to understand what went wrong and how to move forward and figure that out, solve problems. That's really key.
And what about this element of trust? How do you, as a consultant, you have trust from your clients. How do you gain that trust?
I think by doing good work, and being honest. And don't overpromise. Don't overpromise that you're going to do something when either you can't or you don't have the time to do it. So I think when you show them good results, I think you're going to gain more trust from them.
I like that guidance too. I think that's really great. Would you say that counts also in grad school and postdoc, whatever, as well as in industry?
Yeah, I would say so as well, because everyone has deadlines. Everyone's going to be working on a specific project. Just, be honest and don't, like I said, don't overpromise. That's actually very important.
Yes, don't overpromise, so you can underpromise and overdeliver sometimes. That's always
There you
great.
go. You can overdeliver.
Yeah, that's right. And tell us a little bit about, when you're trying to ascertain, okay, what can I do in this period of time? Are you thinking just about what's in your hands, or are you thinking about your team and what we can do over this time? Is it typically a team-oriented approach for a client?
A lot of time it is, and like I said, it just depends on the project. Sometimes there's, I'm working by myself. But on many projects, we're working as a team. And as a team, when you have different experiences, different backgrounds, a lot of times it's easier to solve those problems, jointly.
Yeah, absolutely. If I were to ask you, and I'm going to ask you the reverse too, what do you miss the most about your time in academia? And what would you say you would miss the most if you were not in industry? What would you miss from industry?
Okay, so in academia, I think you get to do a lot more basic research, right? So in industry, you're not necessarily doing all the basic research that you would like to do. You have a project and you have set goals and you've got a timeline to complete that in. In academia, yes, you've got a timeline, but it's typically a lot longer. And if you find your research goes off in an area, well, potentially you can continue that research in that area. So that's one thing. And then publishing as well. A lot of times you can't publish as much when you're in industry. And going from industry to academia, I would say I would certainly miss working with the different variety of people that I get to meet. That's a big thing. I love interacting and being able to, solve problems that potentially is too difficult for my clients to solve.
And so that's so interesting that you put it that way, because it sounds like the diversity of projects that you have to deal with is also fun. Not only the people, but from the way you describe it is the challenge of trying to help them solve their problems, no matter like what, they come in different directions, they come in different projects.
Right. And I think that's the experience and the reality of a CRO, right? You're always going to have different clients and different problems. If you're working in, say, a large pharma, if you're working in the same company for several years, I don't think you're going to have that experience. You may be working on one project for 5 years. You may be working on one project for a few months. It just depends what they give you.
That is so interesting. So now we get to see really some of the exciting part of being a CRO, where, you're doing things and things are churning out, projects are churning out with different people, versus a large company setting where you are doing your project and maybe you're working with the same people over and over again, right? And that's really insightful, Susan. I had not thought about that, but I could see that being really exciting, because you really can't get bored, right? You have so many different so many different challenges to keep you entertained. But so now, if you were to say, what are the aptitudes that have given you your success? I mean, you've gone really through the trenches, but also put in the time to gain this expertise, and now you're a consultant. What do you think are these elements that let you succeed so well through your career?
I think the willingness to learn, that is so important. To want to solve problems, to want to just keep learning. I am still learning every single day. Every single day I go into the lab, I learn something or I read something new. I really think that's a big key. And wanting to help people, wanting to impact society.
That's important, right? I mean, we lose track of some of that because we're trying to help ourselves in our career, but having that motivation to help people, do you think we can be as impactful helping people in academia as we are in industry? What's your opinion on that? Can we find a balance there?
Yeah, no, I think you can. And I think because, you can always publish, right? In academia, you can't always publish in industry, but there's nothing like seeing a drug, a commercial for a drug that you've worked on, that you've really helped, discover a cure or help alleviate some problems with, and you realize, hey, I really am having a positive impact on society. I really did something to help people.
That's awesome. And you must be so proud to see some of those commercials, either on TV or to say, hey, I worked on that. That was me.
It is. It's awesome. Exciting, especially the first time. You're like, oh my gosh, I worked on that. Look at that.
Yeah. Does it get old? No, I can't imagine it does get old.
No, I don't think so. Not for me.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so now let's go to I think what many people who join this program might want to hear, which is, what are some of the elements you would be looking for in qualities of the scientists you would be looking for to say, hey, yeah, we could hire you. These are the elements that you should have if you're looking to work with you.
Sure. So that's really important. I used to do a lot of interviewing, in my past life. And so I think key elements are making sure you have the right background. That's really important. I'm not sure if you should apply for a job if you don't really have those basic skills. And communication is huge. A lot of times I look at a resume and I say, oh, this person would be great at this position. And then you get on the phone and they really either can't explain what they did, or it seems they don't understand what is on their resume. So communication is huge. Being able to carry on a conversation, being able to answer questions. I think that's really huge too.
That's great. So you're talking mainly about the interview process, or I mean, as a whole, right? What if we don't have the whole background? Is there any way for us to bolster that so that we can be better prepared? What would be in this background category that you're looking for that we should hone in?
Sure. So I guess classes are really important, and the type of research that you've done if you're in grad school. I think that's really important for having appropriate background for a position that you're really interested in. Because if you don't have background and you get the job, you're not going to be able to succeed, right?
Yeah. Do you don't, I mean, I guess you do learn on the job too, right? But you want to have a good background.
Exactly.
Yeah. Susan, I'm also a big proponent of getting people to have a little bit of project management know-how, and maybe taking a couple of courses. Do you find that is helpful in your line of work as well?
I think project management will be helpful in any line of work, honestly, in any industry. If you can't manage your projects, you're not going to be able to move them forward, in a timely manner. So I think that's a really great idea, Tony.
Yeah, and I've been encouraging people to just seek out resources for project management. There's so much online that can be helpful, but it's the tie-in between project management and science. And maybe some of the guidance that we do give to our grad students, they take it on and they do project management on their own projects, right? But in the company, I mean, I would think that is super important, because there are so many people that are coming in and out of a project and doing different things. How does that look like in your line of work? Do you have a project manager that helps you, or are you doing the project management and orchestrating what's happening with each project?
So I guess it depends on my different experiences. So right now I am pretty much managing my different projects, but we do have, I would say, one or two projects where there is someone who is managing it overall, because it's fairly large. And that was the case, back, in the CRO side of things, and even back in industry. You've got so many people working on a team that we had specific project managers that used to basically oversee the entire project, including the people.
And I mean, the levels that you describe, I want the audience here to really understand. We're talking about a large corporation versus a small corporation. What are the numbers? What are we talking about? The number of people involved?
Oh gosh, I think it just depends on the size of your company. I mean, I think when I was back in industry, I had projects where we had probably 50 people, maybe average, on a team. And some were a lot smaller. Some were, maybe 10 or a dozen. And of course, now that I'm a consultant and I only work with 9 other folks, of course, it's a lot smaller. But yeah, it just depends. And And again, I was in industry, I'm talking like 20, 25 years ago. I'm sure things have changed over the years. I'm not sure how big their project teams are anymore.
Do you miss that time when you were in the larger company? Are there things that you do miss about it?
Some, yeah. So basically, because I was working with, medicinal chemists that would discover molecules, design molecules, all the way through the folks that used to formulate them. That's what I miss, that big picture. And I think because I had that background, that was something that I could easily bring with me into, the COO world, because I had that broad experience. I had that picture. And even as a consultant, that's really, really helpful now.
What type of person does well in a smaller CRO versus a larger company? Are there particular characteristics that you would say, if you're this type of person, this would work best?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I guess maybe I've adapted a lot to the different environment. I think. Well, I guess it depends. In a smaller company, you're going to get to know everyone, right? So maybe if you're a shy person, having fewer people to work with, that actually might benefit you. Whereas if you're in a large company with hundreds, thousands of people, you might get lost in the weeds. But yeah, I mean, that's something I had never thought about. That's a good question.
I would think that the level of responsibility in a smaller company is maybe greater, right? Because you have to be, one and for all.
Right, it could be, right. You have to potentially, do your business development, where I never had to do that in large pharma. I was a scientist, I was in the lab, this is my scope of work, and that's what I did. In a smaller company and in a CRO, you basically have to get the business in, right, and to do the work, and so it's a totally different responsibilities.
Absolutely. And it sounds though like you being an active learner and a wanting learner, meaning that you want to learn more, that from the way you're describing it, this is exciting, is to be able to participate in this way in other areas, right? And learn about those other areas.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact that I work with folks that have different backgrounds, and so I'm learning from them. It's just so exciting. It really is. It's great.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Susan, what would you say you like the most about what you do? What's the thing that gets you up in the morning and say, yes, I'm going to get to do this today?
So what I really like, and this may be a little bit corny, I like working with the people. Even in my former job, I mean, I just loved interacting with the folks. I had such a good group, and the consultants I work with now, they're such wonderful people, and I love to solve the problems. I look forward to be able to figure things out to move a project forward. It's just a lot of fun.
That's great. And I mean, I don't mean to ask you in a negative way, but sometimes we have, difficult people to work with, or, people that are not in the same wavelength as you. How do you deal with some of those people?
So I think being respectful, trying to understand where that person's coming from, what their background is, and looking at it not as a negative, but as a positive opportunity to grow yourself, to be able to interact with different types of folks.
I like that a lot. What a great piece of guidance there, because it's about empathy, right? It's understanding where they're coming from and maybe why they're. But there's also this piece that I've come to admire from some of these difficult people, is that change really comes because of these difficult people sometimes, meaning that they make us notice things that, wait, everything is happy-go-lucky in my world, but wait a minute, somebody's being critical for a reason. It sounds like the atmosphere though in the group of 9 that you are working with, that everybody seems to have this mutual respect and mutual trust. Was that because of the chemistry, or because you have been working with them for so long that is already built in? And maybe a little bit more on that is, how do we build trust? How do we end up building this trust where the atmosphere, the culture is so positive and so wonderful that everybody is happy?
Yeah, so I think the fact that we had worked together for years, I mean, that certainly helped, and we all got along. I think respect, that's really a key. If you respect each other and you respect what you bring to the table, and maybe don't feel intimidated, because where I'm working now, I mean, we all work together so well. And I think it's because we respect each other so much, and we realize that, someone has a different perspective, has a great idea, they can bring it to the table. Well, don't be intimidated, don't be threatened. That's a great opportunity to be able to work together to solve a problem.
I like that. Also, again, Susan, great point and great advice there. I thank you so much. I don't know if there anybody else in the audience that would like to ask a question, but I thank you kindly for taking time to speak to us today and give us a little bit of pointers for your success. Is there any last words that you wanna leave us with?
Yeah, so I think the key to a great career and being successful is, enjoy what you do. You'll be happy doing it, and never stop learning. I think that's a big key. Just keep learning.
Thank you so much, Susan. Dr. Susan Bogdanowich-Knipp, President and Consultant at Ravine Pharmaceuticals. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today and giving us these great tidbits.
Sure, thanks for inviting me. It's been great.
Absolutely, and take care.
Okay, thank you, Tommy.